Welcome to our deep dive into mental fatigue and recovery in athletes, specifically for you, track and field coaches out there.
Right. We're going to be pulling some pretty interesting insights from a survey done by the Australian Institute of Sport and Australian Catholic University.
They partnered with ACU to survey 156 experienced practitioners across a whole bunch of sports.
And one of the things that really stood out to me was over 96% of them said that they believe mental fatigue and recovery has a huge impact.
A huge impact on training and competition.
Absolutely.
So let's explore why this matters so much for our athletes and what we as coaches can do about it.
You know what's fascinating, though, is even though so many practitioners recognize the importance of mental fatigue,
Right.
there's a knowledge gap.
Yeah, there really is.
Over 88% of those surveyed said they're only somewhat knowledgeable or not at all knowledgeable.
About mental fatigue.
Yeah, and they felt even less confident when it came to managing it. So
basically, they know it's important, but they don't really know what to do about it.
exactly, and that's why we're here to try to bridge that gap.
Absolutely. Well, let's break down what this survey says about how mental fatigue affects training. And let's think about that specifically in the context of track and field.
Yeah, so one of the major impacts practitioners reported was this decrease in session quality.
Okay.
Now picture this, you've got your sprinter who's normally spot on with their form,
Right.
but suddenly they're struggling to maintain that proper form during repeat sprints.
Makes sense.
Or maybe you have a pole vaulter who's usually a master at visualizing their approach, but now they're having trouble picturing it.
These are all pretty classic signs.
These are telltale signs that mental fatigue is creeping in, and it starts affecting those physical capabilities and their skill development.
And this is all happening during training. But the survey also found that mental fatigue plays a role in competition as well.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it's particularly important to think about how this plays out in a high-pressure environment, like a track and field final.
Right, where the stakes are high.
Exactly. Imagine an athlete in that final who's battling mental fatigue. They might start making compromised decisions, hesitate at critical moments.
Or even have a delayed reaction time right out of the starting blocks.
Absolutely. And these are things that can really make or break a performance.
So we've talked about all these negative impacts of mental fatigue. Now let's look at the flip side, the positive impact of mental recovery.
Right. So when athletes prioritize their mental recovery,
They're going to be better off.
they're going to adapt to training, better process information more efficiently, and regulate their emotions more effectively.
They're just all around going to perform better.
Exactly. It's not just about preventing mental fatigue. It's about actively promoting mental recovery.
And the survey actually gives some pretty good insights on how to do that.
It does.
So one of the most striking findings from the survey was that 61.5% of these practitioners aren't even assessing for mental fatigue.
And a whopping 76.3% are not assessing mental recovery in their athletes.
So we're missing this huge opportunity to understand and help our athletes.
Yeah, and there's some really practical techniques out there that coaches can use to get a better grasp on their athletes' mental state.
Well, how about you walk us through some of them?
So while objective measures like heart rate variability are gaining traction, a really good starting point is subjective indicators.
Like asking the athlete how they feel.
Yeah, incorporating some simple questionnaires about mood and energy level right into those training logs is really helpful.
So basically just checking in.
Yeah, it's a quick and easy way to get a pulse on how your athletes are feeling mentally.
It's all about communication.
Right.
So by combining those subjective measures with some of those objective measures like heart rate variability, you can start to build a more complete picture of your athlete's mental state.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's talk about how we can manage this mental fatigue, especially during training.
Well, the survey found over 55% of practitioners aren't actively managing mental fatigue in their training plans.
So what can we do to change that?
Well, one of the key approaches highlighted in the research is manipulating those technical or tactical drill demands to actually induce mental fatigue.
Intentionally.
Intentionally, but in a controlled environment.
So it's kind of like mental conditioning, getting those athletes prepared for the demands of competition.
Precisely.
And how can track and field coaches specifically apply that concept?
Well, there's lots of ways you can do it. You could add more complexity to your drills, introduce time constraints, or even simulate competitive pressure.
Okay, I like that. Give me an example.
So let's say you have your sprinters doing starts, but you throw in varying time delays to really challenge their focus and reaction time.
Okay.
Or for your distance runners, maybe you challenge them to practice pace changes while you're adding in some distractions to really test their concentration.
Yeah.
The idea is to build that mental resilience right there in training.
So they're ready for anything come competition time.
Exactly.
It's like training their brains to be just as strong as their bodies.
That's a great way to put it.
Awesome. Well, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back to talk about enhancing mental recovery. So stay with us.
The Australian Athletics Championships are fast approaching. It's time to secure your spot at the biggest event on the calendar. The best part? You can reserve your free coach pass and gain access to a packed timetable of coach education sessions, all designed to keep you at the cutting edge of the sport. Jump over to coachathletics.com.au now to lock in your pass and check out the full schedule. Don't miss this chance to learn, connect, and be part of the action.
Okay, so we're back, and now we're going to shift gears a little bit and talk about enhancing mental recovery. And I know the survey actually highlighted the importance of athlete self-selection
Right. Choice.
and choice when it comes to recovery strategies. So what does that look like for track and field coaches?
Well, it really means recognizing that there's no magic formula for mental recovery.
Right.
What works for one athlete may not work for another, and we have to take that into consideration.
Makes sense.
Some athletes might find mindfulness practices to be super beneficial,
Okay.
while others might prefer restorative breaks between those really intense training blocks.
Right, right. So how can we as coaches encourage our athletes to explore these different recovery techniques and figure out what works best for them?
I think it starts with education.
Yeah.
Introducing your athletes to a range of different techniques and explaining the benefits of each one. Guided mental imagery. That's a really powerful tool.
Well,
You could encourage your sprinters to really visualize a perfect start in race execution, or you could guide your distance runners to focus on maintaining that steady pace and positive self-talk during those long runs.
so basically we're creating a toolbox of recovery techniques, and then we're empowering our athletes to choose the ones that work best for them.
Yeah, and it's important to remember their preferences might change over time.
So it's an ongoing conversation.
Absolute communication is key.
So coaches play a huge role in facilitating this whole process of exploring and making sure that mental recovery is built right into those training plans.
Absolutely.
Now, the survey also emphasized this need for a collaborative approach to managing mental fatigue and recovery. And it actually suggested that all those performance support roles,
Yeah.
like your strength and conditioning coaches, your psychologists, your nutritionists, that they all share some responsibility here.
Right.
So how can we as track and field coaches really foster this collaborative environment?
I think communication is key. You need to be regularly checking in with your athletes about their mental and physical well-being.
Just asking them how they're doing.
Exactly. Talk to them about their training loads, their sleep patterns, any signs of stress or fatigue.
Right. Creating that safe space for them to share what they're experiencing.
Absolutely. You want them to feel comfortable coming to you with any concerns they have.
And that communication goes beyond just our athletes. We need to be talking to those other support staff members as well.
Absolutely. You should be sharing your observations about the athletes' mental fatigue and recovery with those other staff members and working together to develop a holistic approach that addresses their individual needs.
So it's a team effort.
Exactly. We're all in this together.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive into mental fatigue and recovery. And I think it's pretty clear now that these are crucial considerations for us as track and field coaches.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Ignoring the mental side of training is like building this powerful engine. But neglecting the steering wheel, you might have all the horsepower in the world,
Okay.
but without proper control, you're not going to get where you want to go.
That's a great analogy. So the research is telling us we as coaches have this critical role to play in both mitigating that mental fatigue and promoting that mental recovery.
Right.
So where do we begin?
Well, I think it all starts with awareness. We need to be tuned in to the signs of mental fatigue in our athletes.
Okay, so what are some of those signs?
Well, things like decreased motivation, irritability, difficulty focusing on changes in sleep patterns. Those are all red flags.
Okay, so those are things that we should be looking out for.
Yeah, recognizing those signs, that's the first step.
Right. But it's not enough to just recognize them. We need a plan.
Exactly.
So what are some practical strategies that we can actually implement?
Well, the survey highlighted a bunch of strategies. We talked about incorporating those mood questionnaires into training logs,
Right.
utilizing wearable technology for things like heart rate variability. Monitoring these tools can be really valuable in giving you insights into your athlete's mental state.
Okay. And we also talked about manipulating those drills to create that mental pressure to build resilience.
Right, right.
So how can we tailor that for different track and field disciplines?
Well, think about the unique demands of each event, right?
Okay.
So for sprinters, you might focus on drills that simulate that pressure of a race start.
Okay.
While for distance runners, maybe they benefit more from practicing those pace changes under more challenging conditions.
No way.
The idea is to try to replicate the mental stressors that they're going to face in competition.
Gotcha. Now, just as important as creating that mental pressure is the recovery piece.
Right.
And we talked about the importance of athlete self-selection, offering them that toolbox of recovery techniques.
Yeah.
So how can we guide our athletes in choosing the right strategy for them?
I think it's important to provide them with a menu of options, explain the benefits of mindfulness, guided imagery, restorative breaks, and all those other techniques,
Yeah.
and encourage them to experiment and find what really resonates with them.
Okay.
Because what works for one athlete may not work for another, and their preferences might change over time, so that communication is key.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Well, I think this deep dive has really shed some light on the crucial role that mental fatigue and recovery plays in track and field. And we'll leave you with this thought-provoking question.
Okay.
Given the variety of management techniques out there and the emphasis on that athlete self-selection, what unique approaches could be developed specifically for different track and field disciplines, considering the unique mental demands of each event?
That's a great question, and one that I think really warrants further exploration. The mental preparation of a sprinter might look very different from that of a distance runner or a javelin thrower.
Makes sense.
And we encourage you to delve deeper into this fascinating topic. The full report from the AIS and ACU is a fantastic resource, and consulting with sports psychology professionals can also provide more tailored guidance.
That's a great point. Well, that wraps up our deep dive into mental fatigue and recovery in athletes, and I hope you all found it valuable.
Me too. Thanks for having me.
Remember, mental strength is just as important as physical strength. So by prioritizing mental fatigue and recovery, you can help your athletes reach their full potential on and off the track. Thanks for listening.